Good evening, it's X Winterview. Back again with another brief dialogue. For my dear friend, guess who? Annastacey, that's right. As I said in my previous brief dialogue, I've been away on a little technological hiatus, or rather the microphone quality forced me off the airwaves for a little while until I could be bothered to go back to the shop and buy a new one. Anyway, enough jibber jabber. Let's get down to it. Let's get down to the business of enlightenment, liberation, and all that. So, in the previous brief dialogue on my return, my long-awaited return, I talked a bit about the basics. Thought I would go into a little bit more of the basics with a talk about negative, unpleasant, unwanted emotional states, and about how they tend to factor in to the search, the seeking for liberation / enlightenment. Always a perennial favourite of the seeker. And so, broadly speaking, we don't have to define every single negative emotional state, nor go into the mechanics of why people feel a certain way about certain things. Suffice to say that unpleasant emotional states, well, they just don't feel very good. And if you're a bit of a biologist of biological slant, or evolutionist of evolutionary slant, not that you have to be either or any of any particular slant particularly, you could say that the so-called negative emotional states probably served or serve some biological purpose in essence, yet on occasion they function out of time with need. So, for example, it's probably appropriate to feel some sense of loss or grief over the object that one loves, but it's probably not so healthy to stay in that state of loss and grief for, say, a prolonged period where it becomes physically hazardous to remain in that state. And so on and so forth. I could argue that for anxiety, for anger, ditto jealousy, ditto guilt, etc. And most of the time, naturally, the organism, if we look at the body as an organism, it wants to get away from it, wants to escape it, as it does any unpleasant stimulus, no doubt. And this body here is no different. When it feels something unpleasant, it no doubt wants to escape it. Why not? Whatever means possible, I'll take them. Then we hear about this thing called enlightenment or liberation. And if you've read the very sort of traditional and more austere accounts of liberation or enlightenment, they talk of wonderful, blissful states of being suffused with golden light, with a sort of calm equanimity about life and its travails, a radiance that shines forth from one's very soul that is recognized by everyone around, and you are henceforth revered as a great master. And who wouldn't want a bit of that when they've been feeling a bit of Mr. Poopy Pants for the last week? So you can see why on paper it's a very attractive proposition, this whole enlightenment thing. If I can get myself a bit of the old enlightenment, I will no doubt feel a bit better. Where was I? Of course, as many seekers will tell you on the so-called search for enlightenment, some of these blissful states are entirely possible and seem to give a tantalizing taste to the seeker, that they're on the right track. And when they hit this eventual place of enlightenment, these blissful states will become permanent, and from that moment on, life will be happily ever after, so to speak. So we need to cover that a little bit, because there's a misconception there. But I will say this, a lot of the negative emotional states, and this point relates back to the intro talk I gave just prior to this one, about this apparent self that exists is a concept. It exists as a concept, given apparent solidity and permanence by the way we conceptualize it, and the way the body seems to respond to those conceptualizations. It's a very seamless play, seamless dynamic, very convincing that you have some kind of independent, autonomous existence. But once that concept, or I should say whilst that concept is in play, you'll find that it has knock-on effects onto a whole bunch of other concepts in a way that can be highly negative and distressing. Let me give you a simple example of action, one's action. If you are, in fact, if you do exist as a separate, independent, autonomous agent or person, then the theory goes, you might say, that you're in charge of your life. You make the decisions, you make the calls. When the chips fall, you're responsible, in essence. And whilst that can have a wonderful concomitant, bringing out my big C words, concomitant feeling of pleasure and agency, a feeling of agency, which is wonderful, that I did this, and because of my actions, a success happened, hence self-esteem is born. It can also have a dramatic negative effect when it's perceived that my actions failed. When I used my personal agency to enact something and it didn't work, what does the mind do? Well, most commonly, it doesn't kind of shrug it off and go, oh well, it beats you up. And it doesn't just beat you up once and go, there, you deserve that. It tends to remember your failures and tries to get you to, this is the kicker here, the beating of oneself, sounds a bit funny, the beating of oneself up is unpleasant. It's an unpleasant experience. And the mind, however, is a funny creature. It doesn't just, or I should say the brain, it doesn't just remember the unpleasant experience or event that you failed at. It puts it in a narrative. I failed, or I'm a failure. And it remembers that. And it serves to remind you of your failures over and over again, because it wants to try and somehow, in its own twisted logic, protect you from not doing it again. So we often hear in more of the self-help domain, you could say, this common idea about you need to change your thoughts to change your life, and so on and so forth. There's a grain of truth in that. However, what is always missed is that there is no agent to change one's thoughts. They either change or they don't, unfortunately. But that's a little bit of a side issue there. The main issue is that once that self is conceptualized, then conceptualized as failing at a task, then it is remembered that the self fails at a task, and then it is reconceptualized, the self as a failure. And now unpleasant mood states are far more easy to generate, you could say. There's my little formulation for that. And so this quest for liberation, for enlightenment, also contains a grain of truth that you will feel better. However, we've got to be very careful with the phraseology in that statement. It's not that you will feel better. It's when it is realized that there is no you to feel better or worse, there's nothing for those events to stick to anymore. So they can still happen. The so-called failures can still continue on merrily, and, this is bad news everyone, can still feel unpleasant and awful. Yet, it is very unlikely that they will stick to this self anymore. They will stick, and it is often reported by the apparent. So this is where it gets real tricky now. The apparent individual, or the individual who was never there, will report that they feel better. See, language gets all messy now. Who's going to report that? Who's even going to say that anyway? Who's talking now? I mean, God, let's not stop with imagined others. Who's talking now? No one. So, what was I saying? Therefore, the quest for enlightenment is a giant, most commonly it's a giant quest to get rid of one's negative emotional states. Whilst it's fair to say that there is some grain of truth to that, the ultimate realization is that negative emotional states can still happen, and they're a natural part of the functioning of life, really. And the desire is more of a childish desire to rid oneself of problems and only have good stuff, like a little kid. I only want to eat ice cream and I don't want to eat anything else. Okay, so there unfortunately is no, or not necessarily, an ever-present blissful state of pink love and golden light and all that wonderful stuff, although that can happen. Why not? Those are transient states. Those are impermanent. They, pop in and out, as they always do, as they always have. But what can be done about it? Nothing, because that is the natural state of the seeker. If there is, I'll spin that another way, if it's imagined that there is an independent, autonomous, separate self / agent in the body or as the body, then the natural impetus is to seek for something better. It can't be helped. It just happens. And the body, this is where it gets kind of crazy, the body itself, apparently, we've got to throw in apparently because there isn't really a body, the body will continue to try and seek pleasure and avoid pain, irrespective of whether it's conceptualizing a separate individual or not. So I kind of negated everything I just said, but it's a bit of a paradox. So anywho, that's my little spiel on the negative emotional states. It feels like a form of therapy to go through a process of realizing that I don't exist, which will make me feel better. But here's the thing. This is the weird bit. There already is not anyone there. There is no person doing any of that. It's a functioning of of thought, in a way. It's a functioning of thought. And there's no agent doing the functioning of the thought. There's no person seeking, no person trying to realize that there is no person. It only feels like it or seems like it. Anyway, the dissolution of the imagined separate entity is very frequently accompanied by quite a profound state of peace and relaxation, at least initially, until that habituates into the norm. And that is because when it's realized that there isn't anyone in the center, there is no personal accountability for anything. No one is doing anything. No one is failing, and no one is succeeding. No one is sitting on their bum watching Oprah, eating ice cream. No one is striding forward, making powerful financial decisions to make huge profits and have an amazing life. No one is getting awful diseases that kill and cripple and maim. No one is recovering from those awful diseases. No one is doing any of it. And this is where it gets more head trippy, it's not even happening. It's not only that it's not even happening to you, it's not even happening at all. Or, if you prefer, and I prefer this, it's happening and it isn't. It's an appearance. It only seems to be happening. But, to be frank, I find telling people that just confuses them. So, let's just stick with the core message, which is there is no separate self. There is no person in here looking out to that. All there is everything. All there is what seems to be happening. It's not happening to you. It's not happening for you. It's not happening because you exist. Alright, I feel like I'm labouring this point. Probably time to stop and have a little relax. Once again, thank you for listening. This has been X Winterview with another brief dialogue. A little bit worried about my headphones. They give a funny buzzing sound. I think the connections are a bit crappy on the recording device. Okay, speak soon.